It's ready. You'll have it. Okay, so everybody should be open to a clean page in their religion notebook. So Carla, are you open to a clean page in your religion notebook? And then we can go ahead and label the top with Chapter 5 vocab. So your religion notebook should be open to a clean page. Oh, and then of course today's date, sorry. November 17th, 2020. And then we'll go through our vocabulary. And we're actually going to start a new thing today, where I'm going to have you copy these concepts of faith. Because your religion tests, a lot of them come from this page. Hint, hint. So, if you have written it, you are more likely to remember it. Or at least it will jog your memory to like, wait, I've heard that before. So, let's start with the vocab. So, Ethan, what is our first vocab word for Chapter 5? Make sure you're open. Okay, I'll put you back and you can try again, but you were supposed to have it open. We're on page 46. Are you on page 46? I'm sorry, 43. 43. Okay, Ethan, what's our first vocab word? What's number 1? Original sin. And what do you notice about the way original sin is written? Loud, confident. You got it. Confident. It's capitalized. So what does that mean about original sin? What kind of noun is it? Who can help him out? What kind of noun is it if it's capitalized? Zadie? Proper noun. Original sin. So make sure that those are capitalized because it is a proper noun. It is a specific name for something that happened. Ethan, what is it the specific name of?
The first sin of Adam and Eve.
The first sin of Adam. Remember, Adam is a person's name, so we capitalize it. And Eve. Eve is also a name, so it is capitalized. And Adam and Eve were also the first what? Michaela?
People on earth.
People on earth, as well as the first, remember your test. Or no, this was your study guide, that study guide that you did. Victoria? Not the first angels. The angels came before the earth, even. Not the first persons. That's the same thing as the first people.
Family.
They were the very first family. Just like our families. They were a mom and a dad and they had kids. They were the first family. But they were also the first people. They were also the first people to do what? Colin?
Sin.
Sin. So original sin was that first sin that Adam and Eve committed. What was that first sin that they committed? Aaron?
God told them not to eat off of a certain tree, and they ate off of the tree.
Good. That was the very first sin. That first sin caused original sin, where God told them not to eat from the tree of knowledge, and they did it anyway. So, Ethan, keep going. There's more to original sin than just that it was the very first sin of Adam and Eve.
We inherit original sin from Adam and Eve, which means we are
Conceived.
conceived and born without grace.
Conceived means when we're made. We are made and born without that grace. Who remembers what grace is without looking? Zari? Come on, guys, who remembers without looking? This is something we talked about in like every single chapter. Victoria.
It's God shares his kindness with us.
Not his kindness, but his
Love.
and his love, his kindness, his Kingston. Friendship. Aaron.
Respect.
There's a certain word I'm looking for. Michaela.
And his gifts.
It's the gift of God's.
Goodness.
My goodness. Okay, look at the book. Colin.
Creation.
Not creation. Look in the book. Smith, did you look in the book?
Yes.
What is it?
Life.
It's the gift of sharing God's life. So the ability to go to heaven is grace. Well, because of original sin, because of Adam and Eve's very first sin, we inherit, which we know from science means it's passed down from parent to offspring and so on. So we inherit original sin because we are all descendants of Adam and Eve, which means from Adam and Eve that original sin was passed down to their children, from their children to their grandchildren to their great-grandchildren, and so on 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 for thousands of years, many thousands of years to us. So we inherit original sin from Adam and Eve, which means we are made, which is the same thing as conceive, but an easier word that you guys will understand when you see it later. We are made and born without grace, which means when we are first born, we don't have this. When do we get it back? Or when do we get it for the first time, really? Not get it back. When do we get it for the first time? Ethan? Not in heaven. Smith?
When we are baptized.
When we're baptized, then we get this. But because of that very first sin of Adam and Eve, which is called original sin, we are born with it, which means we are born without grace. But once we are baptized, we are able to get it. Quickly, Kingston.
So we're technically all related.
Huh?
So we're technically all related.
In God's eyes, yes. We are just very distantly related, unless you are actual siblings or actual cousins. Yes. Okay. Very good. Number 2. Nathan, please. Kingston, what is number 2? Ooh, we have to hurry. We only have 15 more minutes.
Sin.
Sin. Sin. And what is sin, Kingston?
Knowing something is wrong against God's commandments and choosing to do it anyway.
Good. So sin is knowing something is wrong, which means it's against God's commandments. Notice how commandments is capitalized because we're talking about specific commandments. Which commandments are we specifically talking about that are God's commandments? Michaela? The 10 Commandments. So sin is knowing something is wrong or against God's commandments, which we know are the 10 Commandments, and choosing to do it anyway. And choosing to do it anyway. Very good. So when we know something is against God's law, like the Ten Commandments, or we just know it's wrong, and we do it anyway, that is a sin. What if you accidentally, like, you're just walking along and you accidentally hit somebody as you're walking? Hitting somebody is wrong. But if you're walking along and you accidentally hit somebody while you're walking, is that a sin? Zadie?
No.
Why?
Because if it's an accident and you're actually really sorry, because if you actually hit somebody and you weren't sorry about it, that technically would be a sin.
Mm-hmm. But if you do it accidentally, did you choose to do it?
No.
No. So even though we shouldn't hit somebody, like hitting somebody is wrong, if it's an accident, you didn't choose to do it. So no, it is not a sin, unless what caused you to hit that person was against God's commandments. So like if you were just playing and not following directions and not honoring your mother and father and were going wild and crazy when they told you to calm down and you accidentally hit your brother or your friend, well, even though you didn't mean to hit them, you already sinned when you chose to do what your parents told you not to do. Okay, number 3, and then I'm going to have to erase, but remember all of these are in your book. Smith, oops. What is number 3?
Inherit.
Inherit. Inherit. And what does it mean to inherit, Smith?
To receive from a parent or ancestor by genetic transmission.
So we talked about this in science. Inherit means to receive something, not an actual like item, but a trait or a behavior, to receive something from a parent or ancestor, not another, or ancestor, which means somebody that you're related to way back when. The people that you come from, like your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and so on, are your ancestors. So to receive something from a parent or ancestor by genetic transmission, which means you were born with it. Genes are what determine your traits, your behaviors, all of that. So genetic transmission means it's something that is a trait or a behavior, not an actual object. So we know this from science. It means inherit, to inherit, or heredity, means it goes from parent to offspring, and then offspring to next offspring, and so on and so on and so on forever. It's not an actual thing that we get when we're talking about genes and things like that. Okay, so I do have to erase these because I don't have room, but they're in your book. They're in your book. I'll leave number 3, but it is in your book. Number 4. Ethan again. What is number 4? Temptation. Now temptation has a silent P in it. Although it's really not silent. We just don't really hear it as well. Temptation. What is temptation, Ethan?
Temptation is something that makes a wrong choice seem like a right choice.
Good. So temptation is something that makes a wrong choice seem like a right choice. So something like you see a piece of candy at the store and you don't have any money and your mom won't buy it for you. And so you just think, oh, but it'll taste so good. Nobody will know. Those two things, you telling yourself it's going to taste good or thinking it's going to taste good and thinking nobody's going to notice, those are both temptation. They're making that wrong choice to take that candy seem like the right choice. Well, it's the right choice because it'll taste really good when I get it. And it's the right choice because nobody's even going to notice that it's gone. Those make the wrong choice seem like the right choice. So those are examples of temptation. And what is the last word? Zari.
Grace.
Grace. You guys need to remember this one. You're going to see it constantly. What is grace, Zari?
The gift of God's life that He shares with persons.
Good. The gift of God's life. Remember, God is the name, so it needs to be capitalized. God has life, so that is possessive. The gift of God's life that He shares with persons or people.
Miss Fellas,
Yes.
so if you're not baptized, that means you don't have grace?
It depends. We'll talk about it another time. Probably in a later class. So number 5 is grace. The gift of God's life that He shares with persons or people. But persons, remember, include human persons and also angels, because they are technically persons. Because why? What do angels have that make them persons? Michaela, tell me one thing.
They have a mind.
They have a mind. What else do they have? Mason.
A will?
A will. But what do they not have that makes them not people? Colin.
A body.
A body. So people have minds, wills, and bodies. Persons, like God, angels, and us, have minds and wills. But to be people, you have to have a body. Does that make sense? At least in this religion book. That's what they are considering people versus persons. But since we have minds and wills, we are still persons. Okay, let's look at these concepts of faith at the bottom, or in the purple box. The first question, now these are very important. This is what basically this whole chapter is about. The first question, how did Adam and Eve hurt themselves when they chose to sin? What's one way that they hurt themselves when they chose to sin? Carla.
They lost God's gift of grace, and they were not able to share God's life on earth or live with Him someday in heaven.
So, when they chose that first sin, they lost this, which meant they no longer had a share of God's life, which meant they no longer were able to go to heaven. What's the second way that they hurt themselves when they chose to sin? Victoria.
They
Wounded.
their
That A sounds like short U. The rest of it, that's a long U. Abilities.
abilities to think and to choose.
So wounded is another word for hurt, injured. So they were still able to think and choose, but now everything they thought about and chose was kind of tainted or wounded by that sin, which meant that it wasn't as easy to choose the right thing. Once they sinned that first time, They were still able to think and choose, but to choose the right thing was not as easy as it had been. What is the third way that Adam and Eve hurt themselves when they chose to sin? Smith.
They wounded their bodies and would experience suffering and death.
Make sure your book is on your desk, please. Make sure your book is on your desk, please. So what that means is they hurt themselves physically. Because before that, God had not intended, make sure you're on the right page, we're on page 43. God had not intended for us to feel pain or suffering. God did not create us to feel pain or suffering. But because Adam and Eve committed that first sin, they lost that right. So now, because of that first sin, we are able to feel pain and suffering, whether it's physical or emotional. How are we affected by original sin? So that's how Adam and Eve were affected by original sin. But how are we affected by original sin? Zadie, tell me one way.
We were born without grace.
We are born without grace, which means we're born without this. Aaron, what's another way?
Our ability to think and choose are wounded.
Our abilities to think and choose are wounded or injured or hurt, which means it's not as easy for us to choose what's right. And what's the third way? Michaela?
Our bodies will experience suffering and death.
That means that we will experience that pain and that suffering and the eventual death. Because we know no human being, no living thing can live forever, right? Well, God's intention for us was to live forever with him. Well, because of Adam and Eve's original sin, we can now feel pain, suffering, and death. Very good. Quickly, Victoria, if this is about something that we talked about a while ago, it's not going to be good. Is it relevant right now? Okay.
Why do Adam and Eve actions affect on us?
Because they were our parents. I mean, not our parents' parents, but they were our relatives. We all came from Adam and Eve. And so, because, well, it's not up here anymore, we inherit that original sin. Because when we do something wrong, does it only affect us? No. So when Adam and Eve committed that first original sin, it did not just affect them. It affected every single other person that came after them.
So it's basically Adam and Eve's fault that we're suffering?
Yeah.
I don't like Adam and Eve.
Well, but they're also the reason that we're alive.
Yeah. But
So?
they didn't eat the apple.
Well,
Everything.
if it had been somebody other than Adam and Eve, it probably would have happened too. Because were humans created to be perfect? No. So if it was somebody other than Adam and Eve, it would have been somebody eventually. Okay, let's look at that quote down at the bottom. I'm going to read it out loud. You guys follow along and listen to what it says. So make sure you're following along. Follow with your finger, please. Do not, if I keep seeing people leaning in their chair, I'm going to take your chair. Scoot your chair in. If you are leaning forward in your chair, which means your whole chair is leaning forward to get closer to your desk, well, that is not a smart thing because it's going to slide out from under you and you're going to hit your face on your desk. Also, what is the smarter thing to do if you're having to lean forward in your chair to see your desk more closely? Michaela? Just scoot up. If you're having to lean forward, that means your chair's not close enough. Okay. Follow along with your finger while I read out loud. Should not Adam and Eve have been faithful to God? Certainly. And instead, they disobeyed and lost his friendship. So what that sentence says is, should Adam and Eve have been faithful? Definitely. But they weren't. But the Lord loved them as your parents love each of you. Then he thought of saving them by sending them a Redeemer. That is, Jesus Christ, his Son. So, even though Adam and Eve disobeyed him, he still loved them. He still loved people and his creation. So he wanted to send somebody to save them, which he did And who was that? Mason? Not Adam and Eve. That's who he was trying to say. Aaron? Jesus. Pay close attention to the question I'm asking. Please stop doing that. He would come. He would teach the way of truth, and then he would die to make up for men's sins. You see then God's goodness. He at once promised salvation by means of the Redeemer. So what that means is because Adam and Eve, nobody could go to heaven until who came along? Zari?
Jesus.
Jesus. And then Jesus came and he redeemed or saved the world. Okay. Trying to decide. Go ahead and close your religion books and your religion notebooks. Put them away. I changed my mind.